Fat Sex by Rebecca Jane Weinstein. Prologue. No man will ever love you, proclaimed my grandmother in her self-assessed infinite wisdom. I was 9 or 10, old enough to know exactly what she was talking about, and young enough that I believed her. 35 years later, in the kind of therapy they do for veterans of war, I understood that she wasn't entirely right. But she wasn't entirely wrong. Of course, as any therapy veteran would know, right or wrong, it's not about a man's love for me, but my love for... That's helpful. It took me years to say the word fat. It took what felt like an entire brain overhaul to say the words fat sex, and even now it's difficult to feel like a normal person. Fetish walking. Oh, the shame. But as it turns out, not everyone is thin. As it also turns out, not everyone cares. It's not necessary to say we live in a thin-obsessed culture, but we live in a thin-obsessed culture. It's also not necessary to say there is subtle and overt hostility towards the idea of fat sexuality, but there is. There is subtle and overt hostility towards fat in just about every arena of life. There is a war against it, after all. I suspect if we lose that war, the terrorists win. It's not clear who the terrorists are in this case. There seem to be many cells. The Happy Meal, high fructose corn syrup, school lunches, overwork, underwork, recess, television, the internet, video games, eating disorders, poverty, urban sprawl, microwaving Tupperware, the lack of breastfeeding, the ratio of calories consumed to those calories expended, bariatric surgery, the aversion to anal leakage, mostly the lazy fat slobs that just don't get off their asses and eat chicken wings all day, whoever they are. So, okay, even if it appears our culture believes that fat people are gross, the people living in our culture are, well, doing them. And it's not just that fat people let themselves go after marriage, so post-nuptials we are condemned to sex with a fatso. Actually, secretly, or perhaps not so secretly, a lot of people desire sex with the not-so-svelte. There is much evidence of this, procreation for one. But the most powerful is the sex industry. No one knows how many sexually related internet sites there are. Estimates range from 1% to 85% of the internet contains sexually explicit material. And no one knows how many sexually related internet sites there are that feature large women. BBWs, Big Beautiful Women, SSBBWs, supersized Big Beautiful Women. But let's say it's safe to estimate it at a lot. At around the age of 15, during a time in history in between girdles and Spanx, I wore a bathing suit under my dress. The first time I seriously made out with a boy, park bench, East Village, way past curfew. You know who you are. He asked me if I was going swimming. A perfectly reasonable question considering. I thought he said, "You're fat." My mistake. 2 of us girls had a thing for him, and he picked me. It didn't occur to me that, fat or not, if he picked me, I was the one he wanted. But really, how could I know? Reality had very little to do with my perception of reality. That, it seems, is a common problem. Most of us have heard the true tale of Barbie, that if she were a real woman, she would be 7 feet tall, weigh 100 pounds, have 33-inch hips, wear a size 4 dress, a 39 double F bra. There are variations on these calculations. Some less reactionary types say she would only be 6 feet tall and weigh 110 pounds. Everyone agrees, though, that she would have super big boobs. Whatever the precise dimensions, she would be somewhere between unusual and disturbing. It is virtually inconceivable that an actual human could achieve her form without tremendous luck and extensive surgery. There are many books on sociology and feminism that can educate you further on the distorted images of women in our culture, and it doesn't take tenure to notice every aspect of the media perpetuates an extremely thin ideal. It is evident without much discussion that the weight loss industry is ferocious. Women, and more so men, suffer greatly from feelings of inadequacy and shame because of weight. From those with a muffin top to the super obese, the struggle is profound and the impact often catastrophic. It is estimated that 10% of American women have eating disorders. This estimate may be low, as binge eating, in particular, is underreported. Research also suggests that an additional 65% of women demonstrate behaviors consistent with disordered eating. Whatever that means exactly, and whether or not the numbers are precise, it is probably fair to say women in America, and progressively more so all over the world, are screwed up in one way or another about food. This is also true for men. Roughly 25% of all Americans with eating disorders are men, and 40% of those men have binge eating disorders. These numbers are probably not terribly accurate either, because eating disorders are even more underreported in men. Much of this disordered eating is associated with, and a consequence of, dieting. If you haven't heard about how fat Americans are, you must be in Al-Qaeda, though they probably know too. Researchers say that over 30% of American adults are overweight and another 30% are obese. This is according to the very unreliable BMI, body mass index measurement. Nonetheless, a lot of American adults are fat. A lot of American children are fat too, apparently. They say 1 out of 3 American children are overweight or obese. The First Lady has made it her mission to fight the war against obesity in children. Athletes and actors, pop stars, chefs, politicians on both sides of the aisle, fast food producers, schools, and kids themselves have jumped on the anti-fat children bandwagon. From cooking classes to flash mobs to legislation and prohibition, the country is fighting the battle of the bulge on every front. Some of it is couched in sensitivity, and some of it is overtly humiliating. All of it is, thus far, fruitless. No pun intended. So the masses are screwed up in some way when it comes to food. Upwards of 70% of Americans are overweight or obese, and a large number of these fat folks feel shame and humiliation about their size. Then we have the urban legend telling us men think about sex every 7 seconds, and women think about sex almost as much as men. If there are 2 things humans have on their minds, it's fat and sex. Fat and sex may cohabitate, but they have a volatile relationship. Have you noticed that on television and in the movies, anytime a fat person gets into a sexual relationship, the primary storyline is about the emotional conflict of whether their partner actually finds them attractive, and the angst around taking off their clothes. I recall vividly a scene in The Practice between Cameron Manheim's character and her would-be tall, thin, handsome lover, where she expressed her trepidation about sex with him because of her body, and his exclaiming, "Don't you think I find you attractive?" She broke down into tears. Maybe she didn't, but in my storyline, tears come next. And then he swept her off her feet. Figuratively. She was heavy. But on a show where she was otherwise portrayed as a strong, independent lawyer with self-confidence to spare, when it came to getting naked and touched, she was suddenly the uncertain schoolgirl, unsure that the man with whom she had been dating found her sexually attractive. It's preposterous. It's also probably widely accurate. Sadly, I relate. A recent study concludes that obese people have less satisfying sex lives than their thin counterparts. Duke University researchers studied 91 obese men and 134 obese women who completed a sexual functioning questionnaire before enrolling in a weight loss study. The questionnaire covered 9 areas: interest, desire, arousal, orgasm, satisfaction, behavior in relationships, masturbation, and sexual problems. We found that there were lower sexual satisfaction and lower sexual quality of life among women than men, and overall sexual quality of life was low among both groups. However, earlier research, not tied to a weight loss study, sampled 112 obese women in long-term relationships. 67% of these women tested sexually satisfied. Satisfaction was correlated to good sexual communication, positive body image, and partner sexual enjoyment. Dissatisfaction was less tied to weight or their partner's attitude towards weight. Weight negativity was significant to poor body image, but not to any particular weight. This study suggests that couples therapy and working to improve body image would be more effective than weight loss. I'm no scientist, but you don't have to be fat to have body issues, and you don't have to be thin to have fun in bed. I could go on and on about the trials and tribulations of being fat, the bigotry and prejudice, the notion that fat people are the last group it is socially acceptable to mock, the research on sexual dissatisfaction and dysfunction, the conventional wisdom that fat people are sexually undesirable and undesired, the countless jokes at the expense of fat chicks. But that is not what this book is about. This book is about fat sex from a different perspective. Yes, some of the stories will portray a sad reality, and some will portray sexual life experiences most of us will only know in our wildest dreams. But all will portray the reality of fat sex. Not the narrow-minded, bigoted, stilted story of the lonely and isolated fat person who never gets any, but the reality of what 60 to 75% of Americans, most of whom do have sex, experience. Some may find this notion disgusting. Those who do probably could use some therapy themselves. Most will just relate, on some level or another, and whether secretly or not, like it. Because when it comes down to it, Barbie can't stand up, and the average guy doesn't look like Ken, which is for the best since he has no genitals. There's another urban legend. Fat women are better in bed. I have heard various explanations for this phenomenon. It is most likely perpetuated by those who are just more attracted to large people, and therefore to them fat women are better in bed. As stereotypes about fat people go, it is one of the more flattering ones. I choose to believe it, but then again, it serves me. So, how did it work out for me? I will tell you that my grandmother did a number on me, and it's taken work to unbrainwash myself. I still struggle with it every day. But humans are resilient, and sex is a powerful motivator. And you know, fat women are better in bed.